Now, I understand that some people are here who have strong feelings about the subjects we're talking about here today. That's fine. The First Amendment guarantees your right to express your views, but we have to allow a civil discussion to occur in the context of this hearing. So for our friends who are protesting, I ask that you respect the rights of others, respect this committee, and remain quiet so that the hearing can continue. The committee will be in order. Comments from the audience are inappropriate and out of order. If there's any disruption, I'm going to call on it and raise a little bit of fuss here. So let's abide by the rules, and we know there's some hard feelings and tough feelings on some of these areas. So that's one reason we're holding hearings. So we'll just go from there. I'd like to welcome everyone to this morning's hearing to examine the multi-employer pension plan system. As I said at a recent hearing, financial security for workers and their families and their retirement policy in particular have never been more important. And while we've enjoyed a number of successes in this area, today we will be talking about an area of retirement policy that, for a number of reasons, has not delivered on the pension promises made to workers and retirees. A multi-employer pension plan is a collectively bargained pension plan set up by a union and two or more unrelated unionized employers. In this system, the employers make contributions to the plan and pay premiums to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, or PBGC, to insure the plan. Multi-employer plans are operated by a joint board of union and employer trustees that, among other things, sets the amount of the pensions. Or in other words, these boards make the promises. 10 million Americans are covered by multi-employer pension plans, and currently more than 1/3 of these people, or those people, are in plans that are critically underfunded. Many are in danger of default. In the case of a default, the PBGC would pay out pensions on retirees. Those payments are capped by law and would be no greater than $12,870 per year. In fact, in many cases, it will be far less. That would be a steep drop for a retiree who was promised an annual pension of $30,000 or $40,000 in a plan like the Central States Teamsters plan, one of the plans we'll be talking about today. That sounds pretty bad, but the problems in the multi-employer pension system are even worse than what I just described. There are several plans, like the Central States and United Mine Workers plans, for example, that would bankrupt the PBGC if they were to default. The PBGC insurance program for multi-employer plans just cannot handle that load. And if the PBGC's insurance assets are ever exhausted, pension plan payments will drop to nearly zero. The response to this crisis by Congress and the President in 2014 was to enact the Multi-Employer Pension Reform Act, or MPRA. At the request of multi-employer pension plan managers, employers who contribute to multi-employer pension plans, as well as many unions representing employees, the MPRA gave pension plan trustees the ability, in extreme cases, to petition the Treasury Department for approval to cut pensions in the near term in order to avoid insolvency and larger cuts down the road. Now, this law is, to say the least, controversial, and the committee will hear from both defenders and critics of the MPRA today. Now, this is a sobering moment for our country, the pension community, and of course, the retirees. And beyond the hardship for retirees in multi-employer plans, this moment also highlights the challenge of delivering on the promise of pensions in defined benefit plans across the board, both public and private, and the stakes for retirees if these systems fail. Today we will hear testimony from a Central States beneficiary, a retiree whose husband recently passed away and is scheduled to receive a 40% cut in her survivor's pension if Treasury approves the application of the plan's trustees to implement the reductions. Her annual pension would be reduced from more than $30,000 to just under $18,000. Her case is the very definition of hardship in the context of the pension system. We will hear testimony today about the United Mine Workers Pension Plan, another financially strapped pension plan that, even without additional cuts, provides a relatively modest pension, around $6,000 per year on average, for its beneficiaries. In addition, we have witnesses who will address the hard truth that without the MPRA, future pension cuts will be even worse. We will hear that the MPRA allows many plans that otherwise would fail entirely to keep their benefits from dropping all the way to PBGC levels, or perhaps to no pension at all. Now, we know that there are some who advocate a taxpayer bailout of the PBGC's multi-employer pension program. In my view, that will be very difficult to achieve if recent history is any guide. The idea of a PBGC bailout was proposed by unions, employers, and multi-employer plans back in 2010. Back then, the House, Senate, and White House were all controlled by Democrats, and the proposal got absolutely no traction whatsoever. I have a hard time seeing how such a proposal would move forward in the current environment. But for the sake of argument, let's imagine that there was another way outside of premiums to finance the PBGC. What then? The cuts would still be larger. Older retirees and disabled retirees who today cannot receive cuts at all under the MPRA would be cut all the way down to the PBGC level. Even the retirees whose pensions are eligible for cuts under the MPRA are at least assured of always receiving at least 10% more than the PBGC level, and perhaps much more. But without the MPRA, even that minimal level of protection would vanish. Ultimately, the critics of the MPRA have to recognize that when dealing with this problem, there were really only three choices: bad, worse, and worst of all. In 2014, a bipartisan majority in Congress and the President went with bad. No one is happy with that choice. I suspect that it was the best option available to us at the time. The question we have to consider now is, how can we avoid these problems in the future? Today, we will hear testimony about how the design and funding of multi-employer plans led us to this point. Not surprisingly, I suspect we'll hear that it is easier to promise pensions than it is to fund them. We will hear that because of lax rules in the current system, there is a great temptation for plant managers to make unrealistic actuarial assumptions and take on excessive investment risk. And we will learn about disturbing parallels between multi-employer pensions and the defined benefit pension plans run by many state and local governments. Finally, I want to say another word about the mine worker pension plan. I promised Ranking Member Wyden that I would work with him on this issue, and I've kept my promise. I've done my best to advance legislation introduced by Senators Capito and Manchin, which, given the already low pension payments, the Obama administration's war on the coal industry, and the depressed state of the economy in most of coal country, is, in my view, the best option for us. I plan to continue that effort. Now, with that, let me just make it clear now that if we're going to have people cause a ruckus in here, I don't want to see that happen, and I won't permit it to happen. So the committee is going to be in order, and the comments from the audience are, if any, are inappropriate and out of order. And we don't want to have to call on the police to restore order, so let's hope we don't have anybody get out of order here in this hearing today. This is an important hearing. We ought to all be very interested in whatever we can gain from this particular hearing. We've been working on this for a long time. With that, I'll turn to my Ranking Member, Senator Wyden, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you're right. We have been working together, and I look forward to getting this key legislation passed. This is an extraordinarily important time for our country, colleagues, because there is a long-standing principle of pension law that says you don't take away benefits that our workers have earned. But unless the Congress acts soon, That guarantee is about to be broken. There are more than 1,000 multi-employer pension plans around America, and millions of Americans rely on them for economic security in retirement. Yet many of those plans are now in dire financial straits. And I want to begin this morning by focusing on one group of workers who are particularly at risk. Thousands of coal miners' pensions are hanging in the balance. And the clock is ticking down to disaster for retired coal miners in the coming months. Over decades of perilous, back-breaking work fueling the American economy, our miners earned retiree health benefits and pensions. There is, however, a serious risk that thousands of miners are going to lose their health benefits by December of this year. By December of 2017, miners' pension benefits could be at risk as well. Now, I come from a state that doesn't mine coal, but there are communities across my home state that have historically been resource dependent, and a lot of those communities are experiencing the same kind of economic pain you see in mining towns in other parts of the nation. You cannot turn your back on the workers and retirees in these communities when times get tough. When Mrs. Lewis speaks, and she's from Ohio, members are going to get a real sense of the stress that families face when they are looking at losing their pension rights. If the worst happens, retired miners may have nowhere to turn. And the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which insures multi-employer pension plans, is under extraordinary pressure and is at risk of insolvency down the road. Our colleagues, and we're very pleased that Senator Manchin is here, Senator Manchin and Senator Capito, who represent West Virginia, have come together on a bipartisan basis to introduce the Miners Protection Act. Senators Brown and Casey and Warner have talked to me again and again about the importance of this issue to their states. It's my view that this committee and the Congress should move on this bill as soon as possible. Now, of course, it's also critical the Finance Committee take a wider view at the crisis unfolding in multi-employer pension plans around the country. Hundreds of them, accounting for the pensions of more than 1 million workers and retirees, were less than 40% funded as of 2011. And unfortunately, a provision that added fuel to the fire was slipped into a must-pass government funding law in 2014, and it passed over my strong opposition. It gave a green light to slashing benefits in a lot of the hardest hit multi-employer plans, and that is going to make life a lot tougher for a great many seniors across the country who are already struggling to get by. I'll close by saying, Mr. Chairman, that today's hearing, in my view, ought to be just the beginning of a fresh look at our broken retirement system. We have a lot to do. We ought to be looking, for example, at what a number of the states, like my home state of Oregon, is doing, where we're on the cutting edge of retirement policy. We ought to look, for example, at reforming the common bond provision, which has been a vital part of retirement policy debates in the past. We also ought to be looking at making the Savers credit refundable, and a number of colleagues here on the Finance Committee have joined me on this issue. So what this is really about is making sure that Congress ensures that the promise that pension benefits are all about is protected. And it's an enormous challenge, and there isn't any silver bullet policy that is just going to fix everything right away. But we are talking here, colleagues, about the economic security of millions of Americans. So today we're going to look at a number of important issues. I know my colleagues are going to talk about the miners question. I've mentioned other questions that we ought to be looking at, particularly the role of the states, reforming common bond, making the saver's credit refundable. The Finance Committee is the place where Democrats and Republicans can come together to find solutions to the enormous retirement challenge in America. Now, as you know, Mr. Chairman, the Finance Committee Democrats and I sent a letter to you outlining many of our concerns. And I think it would be fair to say, Mr. Chairman, that Democrats very much want to work with Republicans on a bipartisan basis to meet this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Now, I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce today's witnesses. I'll introduce the entire panel and then give each witness 5 minutes for opening remarks. We also have Senator Manchin here, who would like to introduce one of the witnesses. Senator Brown would like to also join in. And we'll do that before we turn to the witnesses themselves. Our first witness is Joshua Gotbaum. Mr. Gotbaum writes and advises on retirement, finance, and budget issues as a guest scholar in the Economic Studies program at the Brookings Institution. From 2010 to 2014, Mr. Gotbaum served as the director of the U.S. Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, or PBGC. That's a 2,300-person agency responsible for investing $80 billion of assets and ensuring pensions for more than 40 million Americans. Before heading the PBGC, Mr. Gotbaum ran and reorganized Hawaiian Airlines, served as CEO for the September 11th Fund, and was confirmed on a bipartisan basis to presidential appointments in the Treasury and Defense Departments and the Office of Management and Budget during the Clinton administration. Mr. Gotbaum is a fellow of both the National Academy of Public Administration and the National Academy of Social Insurance. He has degrees from Stanford and Harvard's Law School and Kennedy School of Government. Our second witness is Mrs. Rita Lewis, a beneficiary of the Central States Pension Plan. Mrs. Lewis is the widow of the late Butch Lewis, who worked 40 years for the USF Holland, an Ohio-based trucking company. Mr. Lewis, who was a leader of the Southwest Retirees Pension Committee, was a participant of the Central States Pension Plan and unfortunately passed away last New Year's Eve from a massive stroke. Mr. Lewis became a truck driver after facing life-threatening injuries he suffered in the Special Forces Army Rangers while deployed in Vietnam. Mrs. Lewis currently works for the Police Department of Westchester, Ohio, where she also resides. We're very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Lewis, and appreciate your willingness to be here today. My understanding is that Senators Portman and Brown will want to make a brief introduction to their constituent, Mrs. Lewis. So let's recognize you, Senator Portman, first, and then we'll recognize Senator Brown.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome her to the committee today. As Rita knows, I got to know her late husband, Butch, last fall in working on these issues and was inspired by him. He's had a fierce determination. As you said, he was a Vietnam veteran. He was a proud patriot. He must have been a very good soldier because he's a straight shooter, and he understood, Mr. Chairman, some of the problems you're talking about with the system, but he also understood the unfairness of the process that's currently got Rita in a tough situation that she'll talk about in a moment. But I thank her for being here. I thank her for being someone who is willing to work with us to try to find a solution. She's been terrific. I also like to thank a couple other Ohioans who are here. Mike Walden, I see there. Whitlow and Barb White are here. Tom and Linda Kreckler. They've also worked hard with us on our legislation and how to find ways to help protect these earned pensions. And then I'd also like to acknowledge a couple other Ohioans. Dave Dilley from Fresno, Ohio is here. Norm Skinner of Dresden, Ohio. As Mr. Roberts knows, these are coal miners from Ohio who are here to talk about the coal miners' pensions issue. And they're hardworking guys who deserve better than they're getting from their pensions. And look forward to hearing from them about the legislation I'm supporting that Senator Manchin will talk about today, too. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me that privilege, and we look forward to hearing your testimonies.
Well, thank you, Senator Portman. We'll now turn to Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I echo my colleagues' kind words about Rita Lewis. Thank you for joining us so much and for speaking out. And I know the grief and hurt are still so close to you, and I'm so sorry. And hope that this will help you some, knowing that you are fighting for what Butch fought for his entire life. Rita lives in Westchester, Ohio. Her husband was a legend to Ohio Teamsters. He understood that a strong, vibrant union movement created the middle class in this country. He was always fighting for something bigger than he was, for his family, for your 2 children, for your grandchildren, and for our state. In an era of declining wages, he understood that pensions and health care and wages were all about the union movement, and I so thank you for that and Butch for that. He was drafted by the Pittsburgh Pirates to play baseball. Instead, he went to Vietnam. He was a member of the Special Forces Army Ranger. He had life-threatening injuries in Vietnam. He came back and became a Teamster, and he was a leader of the Southwest Retirees Pension Committee. This morning, Rita had said earlier that Butch said the cuts being forced on retirees amount to a war against the middle class and the American dream, and that's what he devoted his life to. Rita's facing 40% cuts to her already reduced widow's benefit. She says she's fighting not just for herself, but the 270,000 other retired truck drivers, and that's what Butch did. That's what Rita does. For that, we're grateful. This hearing, Mr. Chairman, is also about doing the right thing for the mine workers also. I'm glad Cecil is here to make that case, and numbers of other mine workers, as Senator Portman said, from Ohio and around the country. So thanks to both of you and Rita. We really look forward to hearing you talk about Butch and his mission in life. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you, Senator Brown. At this point, we'll recognize our esteemed colleague from West Virginia to make his introduction, if you would like to.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, let me thank you and Ranking Member Wyden, my friends, for taking this important piece of legislation to all of us. First of all, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask that the handout that I've given be entered into the record. I think if all the members should have a copy, it's the brief chronology of the UMWA Health and Retirement Funds and the history of the U.S. government's involvement. So this is more than just piece of legislation we're asking for. It's basically to honor the commitment through law that starts back in the 30s. So I think we have a tremendous story to be told here. The thing I want to say, Mr. Chairman, first of all, you're a product born and raised in the coal fields in southwestern Pennsylvania and close to West Virginia, as you know.
And in Utah, we have a lot of...
Oh, absolutely, in Utah, too. But there's not a more proud, patriotic group of people, the men and women that basically have mined the coal. This is a resource that we've taken for granted. The history is not being told, and children today are not learning about the country they have and how they got it. It became at the sacrifice of the most plentiful resource we've had that fueled the Industrial Revolution, that defended this country, mined the coal, made the steel, that built the guns and ships, defend this country, won every war. And it's so important that basically the chronology of this law is in this by Harry Truman, and it's moved up from the 40s all the way into present day. So I'm here, and I have the honor of introducing my friend, but also a friend to every miner in America, and the most committed person that I know in this movement for the United Mine Workers is Mr. Cecil Roberts. He is a 6th-generation coal miner from Kanawha County, West Virginia. He has been the president of the United Mine Workers of America since 1995. He was reelected to his 5th full term as the international president in 2014. In fact, he is the 2nd longest standing president of the United Mine Workers of America, next to John L. Lewis. Mr. Roberts is here today on behalf of our nation coal miners, and we have them from all over the nation, and we're so proud that they are here with us today. They have answered the call whenever that call came. Not only in the mining field, but basically most of them are veterans, have fought in the war, so they know the patriotic duty and responsibility they have. When our economy was stagnant, these miners fueled the growth and expansion. They kept their promise to us, and now it's time for us to honor ours. The promise that President Truman made to our country and to our miners. These miners are now facing multiple pressures on their health care, pension benefits as a result of financial crisis and corporate bankruptcies. Despite being well managed, the UMWA 1974 pension plan is now severely underfunded and on the road to insolvency. And the Miners Protection Act, which we have before you, will cure that. That is why I joined Senator Capito, Casey Brown, Senators Warner, Roberts, Kane, and others. This is truly a bipartisan movement to the Minors Protection Act, and I want to thank all those who's joined as co-sponsors. Mr. Roberts is going to speak on the importance of the bill and to provide an overview of the history of the promises that the U.S. government and co-operators have made to the minors of this country. The bill honors the promise of lifetime health care and pensions made by the U.S. government and co-operators. It simply seeks to protect the pension and health benefits of retired minors and their dependents. This bill is particularly important to my home state of West Virginia, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Senator Wyden, because West Virginia has more retired union minors than any other state. And I like to say this, there's no state's been hit harder economically than we have today with the transition that's going on. But the undue pressure by this administration has wreaked havoc on West Virginia families. Out of 90,594 retired UMW workers in the country in 2014, more than 27,000 of those people live in West Virginia. I would also note that one of our West Virginia minors, Mr. Levi Allen, is with us. He's traveled to support this legislation. He is from the northern part, Marshall County, West Virginia. It's a Murray Energy Marshall County mine, formerly known as the McElroy mine. It was a Consol mine, McElroy mine. I want to applaud Mr. Allen, my friend Mr. Cecil Roberts, for their colleagues, for their tireless efforts. I want to thank you two both for your commitment to moving this legislation forward. It truly is. It's a commitment and a promise that we all made. This country depended on this energy, the most abundant energy. It's the only energy next to nuclear that basically gives you a base load. It runs 24/7. Nothing else does it in America. As this transition going on, West Virginia is not fighting the transition. We know that coal is going to be a staple part. We want to make sure we do it better, cleaner, with more technology. We're asking all that, but don't put the lives and futures of these miners who've given their life to the industry that we have today, to the energy that we have today, and to the country that we have today, sir. And that's all we're asking for. The Miners Protection Act is a fix. It's a fix that works for not only the miners, but for America. So with that, I'm excited to be here on behalf of my friend and get a chance to introduce him, President of the United Mine Workers of America, Cecil Roberts.
Well, thank you, Senator Manchin. I think it's high praise for you and Senators Portman and Brown. Your comments here today are very important. I was raised in coal country, and I understand a lot of my friends were coal miners as well. So it's a big problem to us, and just want to express my gratitude that you would take time to show up and testify. Well, our final witness today is Dr. Andrew Biggs, a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, or AEI. Dr. Biggs studies Social Security reform, state and local government pensions, and public sector pay and benefits. Before joining AEI, Dr. Biggs was the Principal Deputy Commissioner of the Social Security Administration and an Associate Director of the White House National Economic Council, and served on President George W. Bush's commission to strengthen Social Security. Dr. Biggs holds a bachelor's degree from Queen's University, Belfast, in Northern Ireland, master's degrees from Cambridge University and the University of London, and a PhD from the London School of Economics. I want to thank all of you for coming. We will hear witness testimonies in the order that they were introduced. Senator Manchin, you don't have to stay if you.
I would sure love to, but I've got another. As we know, they double park us every time, and I've got to get. But I'm just so proud of everybody here and everybody that made an effort to come here. Well, so with that, thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
We know that you're busy, and we also know that you have a lot of duties, and we appreciate you taking time to come and speak here today. So with that, we'll turn to you, Mr. Gotbaum, and please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Wyden, members of the committee, thanks very much for the opportunity to talk about these plans, about the more than 1 million people whose lives will be affected by what you do to them, and what Congress can do to help. Since you all have my written testimony, I'm going to summarize it. I'm going to try to summarize it with 4 points. The first point, sadly, is that Mrs. Lewis is far from alone. More than 1 million people and their families could lose their pensions if this system goes down. Second, this is not a case of bad people or bad plans. This is mostly a case of bad luck. Third, the Multiemployer Pension Reform Act, controversial though it is, offers some plans a chance to preserve benefits by avoiding having everyone's pensions cut down to PBGC levels. Repealing MIPRA would not make things better, it would make them worse. It would guarantee the collapse of the multi-employer system. So rather than repealing MIPRA, I hope there are some other things that Congress can do that I hope you will consider. One is you can enable the PBGC to do its job, which is preserving these plans, by letting it collect adequate premiums. Secondly, you can help plans survive by allowing new plan designs, but while making sure that the move to new plans doesn't doom the existing plans. Let me talk a little bit about this piece of legislation, MIPRA, that none of us likes, but some of us think is necessary for the moment. Most multi-employer plans have a large group of employers. When one becomes underfunded, there are others who can make up the shortfall. But in some plans, the employer base has shrunk. It's shrunk because of trucking deregulation or because of consolidation in foods, hotels, or coal mining. And in those plans, many retirees earned their benefits working for companies that are no longer around. The term that is used, although it's a term that no one likes, is orphans. When these plans become underfunded, the companies and workers that are still active in the plans are being asked not only to pay for their underfunding, but to pay for the underfunding of orphans as well. Now, one thing that the committee should know is very often they do. They reach into their pockets and they take money out of their paychecks to cover the shortfall for employees of other plans. But when there are more orphans than actives, at some point the burden just becomes too great. The result is a death spiral. Employers that can withdraw, like UPS did, they do so. And then the burden on the remaining employers becomes intolerable. They withdraw too, and the plan runs out of money. When that happens, all benefits are cut down to PBGC levels. Hidden on my testimony on page 3 is a microscopic chart that gives you an idea of what it means to go down to PBGC levels. And in one example in that chart, that's a 50% cut. MIPRA gives some plans a chance to avoid that 50% cut, to preserve benefits above PBGC levels. Central States, for example, has proposed an average cut of 23%. That's a tragedy. Nobody thinks that that's a good thing, but it is better than 50%. But even getting 50% from PBGC is optimistic because PBGC is projected to run out of money in 8 years. And once PBGC's own fund runs dry, it will only be able to pay a fraction of benefits, maybe 10%. That's not a 50% cut, that's a 90% cut. So I hope you don't repeal MIPRA. But what I hope you do is make sure that PBGC has the resources to do its job and preserve plans. No one likes to pay higher PBGC premiums. But without them, PBGC won't be able to do its job. Fortunately, multi-employer premiums are much lower than the premiums that 90+% of plans already pay. Multi-employer premiums are 26, now 27 bucks a year. The average plan outside of the multi-employer system pays 140 per person a year. So there's room for growth. The second thing you can do is to allow the new plan designs, but pay attention to the details. In pensions, these matter. Unfortunately, the proposals for new plan designs The new idea for real legacy plans is to weaken them. It makes it easier for employers to withdraw from them. It puts them at greater risk of failing. And so, while I very much hope that you will allow new plan designs because they are necessary, I also hope that you will make sure to pay attention to the safety of the old plans in several ways. One is by making sure that the actuaries don't get too optimistic, because that's when plans fail, when actuaries get too optimistic. And in addition, to make sure that the move to new plans doesn't eliminate the PBGC premium base so that they have to come back to you hat in hand again just to do their job. In closing, thanks very, very much for holding this hearing and for your interest. More than 1 million Americans are in your debt. And if, as you proceed, I can help, I'd be honored to do so. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Ms. Lewis, we'll take your testimony now.
Chairman Hatch, Ranking Member Wyden, and members of the committee, thank you so much for inviting me to speak, and I'm honored to be part of this most distinguished panel. My name is Rita Lewis, and I live in Westchester, Ohio, and I'm here representing my dearly beloved late husband, Butch Lewis, who worked 40 years for a Midwestern trucking company. Butch worked with thousands of retirees across the country until his last dying breath to stop the shameful and unfair cuts authorized under the Multiemployer Pension Reform Act, known as MEPRA. I'm here not just for myself, but to speak on behalf of the 270,000 retired truck drivers, widows, and spouses who will be devastated if the Central States Pension Plan is allowed to go through with these cuts. And this is not a partisan issue. We're Republicans, we're Democrats, and we're independents. This is an issue of fundamental American values of keeping earned promises to this nation's retirees. I understand that if Central States can cut our benefits, there are another 100 to 200 underfunded plans that are just waiting to cut their own retirees' benefits. But I urge you today to find a solution to protect our pension benefits before this becomes a huge national crisis. And here's my story. My husband and I were married for 40 years after being childhood sweethearts. After high school, Butch gave up a baseball career to volunteer in Vietnam, where he served in the Special Forces Army Rangers. He got hit in the knee by mortar shells and came home with life-threatening injuries. When Butch returned home, he got a good-paying job in the trucking industry. He joined the Teamsters Union, and we got married and started a family and had a good life. But for 40 years, he went to work driving a tractor trailer, which is hard, stressful work. And he did this even though he had 37 surgeries to fix the knee that he had sustained the injury in Vietnam. He worked hard so he could earn a good pension. And this pension wasn't a gift. He worked hard for every penny. He gave up wages and vacation pay and other benefits in exchange for a lifetime retirement income. And last October, Butch got the letter from Central States that his pension was being cut over 40%, from just over $3,000 a month to $1,998. Butch made it his mission to stop these cuts. But after fighting hard, he died of a massive stroke last New Year's Eve. This was the happiness that I had that I'm never going to have again. Now I'm left without my husband, who was the love of my life, and facing cuts to my survivor benefits, also by 40%, from $2,500 a month to $1,498. If my benefits are cut, I'll have to sell the house that Butch and I had made our dream home, and I will have a harder time taking care of my dad, who has stage 4 lung cancer, and I won't be able to help pay for my grandchildren's college, a promise that we made to them. But luckily, I'm in better shape than many of my fellow retirees. Whitlow Wyatt of Ohio, he's going to lose 60% of his pension. His wife now has stage 4 breast cancer, and they aren't sure how they're going to make it. And Ava Miller of Flint, Michigan, she's facing a cuts of 58%, and she's probably going to have to sell her home. And Ron Dottenmeyer of Iowa is facing cuts of 60%. He doesn't even know how he's going to make ends meet. And there are thousands of stories just like these. And I know that Central State says that the average cuts are around 22.5%, but just about everyone that I've talked to and my husband talked to, they're facing cuts of 40, 50, 60, even 70%. And I was pretty stunned to hear that we're proposing all of these cuts, that the fund's director, Tom Nyhan, got a $32,000 raise and is making a total compensation of over $694,000 a year. And that's why we are respectfully requesting a forensic audit. And Senators, as you know, MEPRA was negotiated behind closed doors without any input from the retirees and the widows, who are going to be the most affected. And as I understand it, MEPRA erases 40 years of federal protections, which states that plans can't cut back the benefits of retirees unless the plan completely runs out of money. But our benefits are being slashed right now, 10 to 15 years before Central States is expected to run out of money. And some say it's better to get a haircut today than a beheading tomorrow, but this is a beheading for most of us. And those of us facing these pension cuts, we're in our 60s and our 70s, and we don't have the time or who's going to hire us to make up for that lost income. And let's face it, a lot of these retirees, like my husband, will be long gone before Central States runs out of money. MEPRA blames all of us for the financial problems of the multi-employer pension plans, even though we didn't cause any of this. And this is plain wrong. A promise is a promise is a promise. And I just want to thank my own senators from Ohio who are working to help us. Senator Sherrod Brown, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for supporting the Keep Our Pension Promises Act, which would solve the whole problem of underfunded multi-employer plans. My husband had great respect for you. And I also want to thank Senator Rob Portman for sponsoring the Pensions Accountability Act, which will fix the broken voting process in MEPRA. Gentlemen, time's running out. Please, please, I'm begging you, don't let politics get in your way. We need a comprehensive bill that both parties can support that truly fixes the problem for current and future retirees. My husband Butch was a hero who fought for this country and loved this country and for the American values that we all hold so dear. And now I'm asking you to be heroes too, by fixing this problem and saving our pensions. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today, and I'll be happy to have any questions that you may want me to address. But I'd also like to extend a thanks to the IBT and ARP for their support, and also Senator Grassley. We'll be forever indebted for all of your efforts and everything you've done to try to help us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. Mr. Roberts, we'll take your testimony.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hatch and Ranking Member Wyden. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was on. Chairman Hatch and Ranking Member Wyden, I want to thank you on behalf of 90,000 UMWA retirees for having this hearing, but most of all, I think I should express to everyone here that this has been a bipartisan effort on your behalf and Senator Wyden's behalf and many of the people on this committee. I'm not going to start naming names because I think I'd have to call the names of most of the people on this committee who have worked in a bipartisan way to try to save the 1974 pension plan of the United Mine Workers of America. And I think this is a plan that absolutely should be saved. And I'd like to take a moment to express why, but if I could just have 5 seconds of my time to commend the courage of Mrs. Lewis for coming here today. I believe that your husband was a true American hero, and thank you for coming here today. You're an inspiration to all of us. It is obviously a problem of great magnitude across the United States of America as we come here today. As you might notice, I'm kind of a little bit out of my element. This is a long ways from Cabin Creek, West Virginia. Although I've been president for a long time, I get a little overwhelmed every time I come here. Both of my grandfathers died in the coal mines. I never met either one of them. My father was a coal miner, and as the Senator Manchin was so kind to say that I'm a sixth-generation coal miner. I know many of these people we're talking about. I'm not President Roberts to most of them. I'm just Cecil when they see me. I've had an opportunity to eat dinner in their homes, and we go to rallies together, church together. So this is a very personal thing for those of us in the coal fields. They say everybody in West Virginia knows everybody else. There's a lot of truth to that. So when Sago exploded, you saw outreach across West Virginia, and the same thing at Upper Big Branch. As we come here today, coal miners have made a tremendous sacrifice to this nation, Mr. Chairman, members of this committee. As we come here today, there's 107,000 of us have been killed in this nation's coal mines trying to energize this nation so everybody else could have a decent way of life and everybody else's economy could prosper. Another 107,000 of us died choking from pneumoconiosis, and as we're in here today, there's somebody dying right this minute from pneumoconiosis or from injuries they sustained in a coal mine. The United States government has a long and history here of being involved in the 1974 pension plan. At the end of World War II, the President of the United States seized the coal industry. A lot of people don't know this part of the story. The first pension plan was not negotiated with the coal industry. It was negotiated with the United States government over at the White House. And it was the White House who said, if you coal miners go back to work and let the nation prosper after this war, then you'll be rewarded with pensions and health care. That was not the first time that the government was involved in this pension plan. Throughout the 70s and throughout the 90s, the government has stood up and been a part of this pension plan and promising these benefits to miners. I think the most important thing that I could say to you today, members of the committee, it's my belief that there's broad support here to fix this. I want to applaud the two senators from West Virginia for sponsoring this bill. This is a bipartisan bill, not only in the United States Senate, it's a bipartisan bill in the House of Representatives. For one time, we have bipartisanship here, and it is a struggle to try to figure out how we can't move from point A to point B when everybody says this is the solution. The one thing that I would ask you to look at is, if we don't do anything else, this is sometimes reality hits us between the eyes here, and maybe we should talk about that before my time is up. If you go to page 6, there's one of three things that's going to happen here. First of all, Congress can fail to act and we can do nothing, and then the 1974 pension plan is going to go insolvent. The cost to the taxpayers of this country of insolvency is $4.6 billion. I don't think that's a good way to approach this problem. The second thing is to take advantage of MPRA, which has been discussed here today, and the cost of that is $3 billion. If you pass this legislation that's been proposed in a very bipartisan way, the cost of the United States government is $2.2 billion, $1 billion cheaper than any other way to fix this problem. I must submit to the members of this committee that no matter where you come from on this issue, if you're very much concerned about the taxpayers' money, then you should pass this bill. If you're concerned about pensioners, you should pass this bill. If you're concerned about health care, you should pass this bill, because every other way that's been suggested here is pretty bad and it's more costly than any other way to fix this. I must ask for consideration, too, on the fact that there's 21,000 retired miners that are going to lose their health care benefits by the end of this year if Congress doesn't act. By 2020 to 2027, somewhere in that neighborhood, this plan is going to go insolvent, and 90,000 retirees are going to lose their benefits. The one thing I must stress to you, in addition to what I've just said, there's $1 billion a year that flows into the most depressed areas, most hard-hit areas of our economy in Appalachia from the health and retirement funds. If these plans collapse, then we'll lose another $1 billion. We've lost 25,000 jobs in the coal mining industry in the last 3 or 4 years. We've been dealing with bankruptcy after bankruptcy after bankruptcy. We've gotten fewer and fewer people paid into these plans, and more people are at risk for losing their health care as we come here today. I urge this committee to start this process of fixing this problem and passing this legislation on to their colleagues in the United States Senate. This is a desperate time for coal miners. I think the coal miners in this country have been promised these benefits. These coal miners in this country have earned these benefits. These coal miners in this country have sacrificed greatly to this nation so all of us can have a better way of life. And we urge consideration of this, and thank you, and I'll be happy at the proper time to answer any questions that's posed to me.
Well, thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Biggs, we'll turn to you.
Thank you very much. Chairman Hatch, Ranking Member Wyden, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding the challenge of making multi-employer pension plans effective and sustainable for the future. The story of how multi-employer pensions became so underfunded is a familiar one. Instead, let me paint a picture of an alternate history which might point toward a better future of retirement security. Imagine if, instead of being covered by a multi-employer defined benefit pension plan, employees instead had participated in a state-of-the-art 401k plan. Employees would be automatically enrolled at reasonable contribution rates. They could take their savings with them from employer to employer within their industry, as they could with a multi-employer pension plan, but they could also carry it to a new field as jobs within their industry became scarcer. They could diversify against risks by not holding stocks within their own industry, a contrast to multi-employer plans in which industry risk is compounded. Those workers could be sure each year that their employer had made his contribution simply by looking at their account balance. With any defined benefit pension, by contrast, it is difficult to tell whether an employer has fully funded his obligations or if he is relying on accounting tricks, such as assuming a high rate of return on the plan's investments. I make these points not because we can rewrite history. We are where we are with multi-employer plans, and it's likely that everyone, from retirees to plan sponsors to the federal taxpayer, will suffer. Policymakers need to approach these issues with soft hearts for those who have suffered through no fault of their own, but also with hard heads to avoid future errors. My point in discussing 401ks is to know how we got here, through poor plan design that failed to fully fund and failed to diversify against risks that were diversifiable. And most important, to avoid choices that could lead us there again. That is why I'm skeptical regarding the ideas for hybrid or composite pension plans that are proposed to take the place of defined benefit multi-employer pensions. These hybrid plans appear to offer the best of both worlds. Like a true defined contribution plan, composites aim to provide a stable, affordable contribution level to employers, which defined benefit plans cannot do. On the other hand, these plans aim to stabilize retirement benefits against market risk by smoothing changes over generations. My concern, which is based on extensive work I have done modeling the finances of state and local pension plans, is that this magic simply cannot be done. So long as a plan is taking significant investment risk, and these composite plans would, by investing mostly in stocks, then something is going to be volatile, be it contributions or benefits. State and local pensions operate under very forgiving accounting rules that allow them to smooth investment returns and take decades to pay off unfunded liabilities. And even with these rules, state and local pensions cannot get on top of their investment risk. There is no reason to believe that composite plans, which aim to restore full funding within 15 years after a market drop, could do any better. I just do not believe that these composite plans can deliver the benefit stability they promise. Worse, if plan trustees are given discretion to put off benefit cuts, it becomes more likely that future retirees will be made even worse off. And then we can end up right back where we are today, figuring out who will bear the losses. Saving for retirement isn't rocket science, but neither is it magic. There is no way to get the high returns from risky investment like stocks without bearing the risk. So while I do not have any easy answer as the problem of how to deal with multi-employer plans or how to treat the participants in these plans, I do believe I have some valuable advice to prevent it from reoccurring. Don't believe in magic solutions. Believe in simple, responsible designs where everyone saves as they should, and the people who choose to take risk are the ones who bear that risk. That doesn't sound very magical, but the alternatives are often worse. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today.
We're going to give 5 minutes to each senator. Let me just ask you, Mr. Gotbaum, you say in your written testimony that the MPRA is the best alternative available for addressing the Teamster retiree pension crisis. Could you please explain why the MPRA is the best alternative for the retirees, even if the federal government decided to bail out the PBGC?
The main reason why I think that MIPRA, miserable though it is, which it is because it gives plans a chance to keep benefits above the PBGC guarantee levels. And there are a lot of judgments in that, Mr. Chairman. One is that Congress won't, and that the industry won't support raising PBGC guarantee levels to the level that we'd like. But accepting that we're already having a heck of a time getting Congress to allow PBGC to charge what it needs to charge just at the current level of guarantee. The reason I say that MIPRA is a better alternative from a dog's breakfast of alternatives is because it offers the chance that people won't get cut down all the way down to PBGC levels, and because PBGC levels are low. Let me take another instance from the mine workers. The PBGC benefit depends on how long you work. So if you work 30 years, the PBGC benefit is good. But suppose you're a mine worker who goes out on disability after 5 years. Then, because you've only worked for 5 years, under the PBGC rules, you only get 1/6 of the maximum benefit. So they are very low. There's no one who likes the idea of MIPRA, no one at all. But I'd rather have Mrs. Lewis talking about $2,000 a month than $1,000 a month. And that's the reason why I say we don't like it, we don't love it, but we hope you won't repeal it, because the difference in her case is probably the difference between $2,000 a month and $1,000 a month.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Lewis, my heart goes out to you. Your husband was a true hero, and we'll just have to see what we can do. Mr. Roberts, you mentioned recent increases in employer contribution rates to shore up the funding in the 1974 pension plan, with rates climbing from $2 per hour as recently as 2007 to $6.05 today. Should it become necessary, what is the prospect of further increases in that hourly contribution rate by employers, and how many employers are still contributing to the mine workers plan?
Yeah, the answer to that, Mr. Chairman, if I may, is I think additional increases in the contribution rate are out of the question. As you've just noted, they've gone up 100 and some percent since, I think, 2007 or thereabouts. What has happened is we have had one company go into bankruptcy twice and then go out of business. We had another company in Alabama that went out of business, and another company has come in their place, but they don't pay into the 74 pension plan. They would not do that. We have probably the second or third largest company in the United States, Alpha Natural Resources, that's filed for bankruptcy in the middle of that process now, and they will cease paying into the 1974 pension plan. If you take those three bankruptcies together, it's a 40-some% reduction in contributions. The coal industry has seen a horrific drop in the amount of coal that we use in this country. There's 200 million tons of overcapacity in the United States as we sit here today. The second thing is we've seen a terrible drop in price. So those things working against each other has not caused a recession in coal fields, but it's called a depression, as Senator Manchin just mentioned. So coal companies, if they asked to pay more, won't, and if they did, they'd be gone.
Well, Thank you, sir. Senator Wyden, my time is up.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Lewis, first of all, thank you for the very powerful wake-up call that you have delivered to the committee this morning. It is so important that the committee move and move quickly, and I think you have really laid out how urgent this business is. As I understand it, the first that you heard about these very substantial cuts in your benefits, the very first time, was after Congress passed this ill-advised law that I was so strongly opposed to. And the reason I'm asking the question, and my background is working with older people and pension issues, the rule always was that people had a chance to kind of plan for retirement. In other words, you were able to think about your choices, and just as you said, you and your late husband gave up that vacation and maybe a boat or whatever it was because you knew you had a secure retirement.
Absolutely.
And the very first time, and I think it'd be important to get this for the record, the first time you heard about anything was after Congress acted. Is that true?
Yes, sir, it is.
And so you and your husband, obviously, it must have been incredibly hard kind of swallowing the news.
Yes, sir, it was.
And part of what your husband was dealing with was the stress of trying to figure out how you all could put the pieces in your life back together again.
Well, and not so much us. He was worried about the hundreds and thousands of other retirees who were going to be affected. For instance, one of his friends that he had known, by the time he paid for the insurance, because he wasn't quite 65 yet to be eligible for Medicare, he was going to have to take out insurance policies on both he and his wife. And by the time that he got that accomplished and what was left of his pension check, he was down to $300 a month. And in this country, that's not the way it's supposed to work. We were always raised in believing that when you work hard, your reward is, a good pay or a pension was promised. I mean, there was never any unwavering doubt that our money was never going to be there. Otherwise, we would have made other financial provisions. We would have taken out an IRA or we would invest it in the stock market. But we were always told that. That's why so many of them stayed in the craft so long. When you figure what they did for a living, they had to keep their bosses happy, they had to handle the traffic on the street, they had to keep their customers happy, they had this stress. Who would want to be out in weather where it's 50 below zero or 120 degrees? And then you have to worry about your safety record. They took time away from their families because of what we were promised. There was never ever any suggestion that that money was not going to be there. And we played by the rules and did everything that was supposed. If we had known any differently, I'm sure we would have all come together like we have now, and we would have had some solutions. But it's like all of this was just dumped on us overnight, like a tsunami.
I admired you, Mrs. Lewis, even before I asked the question. And I admire you even more because I asked about the challenge for you and your husband, and you began by talking about what it meant for everybody else.
Yes.
You laid out what this means for thousands and thousands of other retired people. And my hope is, and your senators and others have been constantly bringing this up with the chairman and I, that the wake-up call that you've delivered this morning really results in a bipartisan solution and fast.
And if I could just say something else, we're going to be essentially the last generation that's going to have any money. And thank God for the union. People can say whatever they want about unions, but it provided us a nice lifestyle. My dad was started in the union, starting at 69 cents an hour, and all 7 of his brothers were working in the union. But by the time my husband and I got married, we had a nice salary, had nice health and welfare, and a nice pension. But that was promised to us. And when you put your faith, and when you turn your money over, every week like you're supposed to, and they tell you that your promised pension is going to be there, you put your faith in those people. And the only thing, if we're guilty of anything, is we put too much faith in the people who were supposed to be looking out for us. And they let us down. We didn't have any discussions when we were getting these letters that the pension was in critical status. We were now not allowed to have any input. And we have a lot of intelligent people that are in this organization. And we all come together and we all have a solution of some kind. But yes, that's what we were promised. And a promise is a promise is a promise.
Mr. Chairman, my time is up. If we could have Mr. Roberts just very quickly, what is the drop-dead date when Congress needs to act, Mr. Roberts?
Probably tomorrow sometime, which we all know that's not going to happen. But let me paint this picture, if I might. The health care benefits of, as I said, 21,000 people will be lost, in my opinion, by the end of this year. That's number one. If we don't act soon, the benefits of this legislation are not going to be as great as they would be if this law passes this year. If this goes down to a couple of years, the amount of funding provided for in this legislation may have a difficult time funding the 1974 plan, so we may not be able to avoid insolvency. Insolvency, by the way, the one thing that I did not say, well, you know, if you want to hear something scary here, will collapse PBGC. If our 74 plan goes into insolvency, PBGC is required to pick up those benefits, even at the PBGC level. It is estimated, not by me, but by PBGC, that 2 to 3 years down the road, PBGC will collapse. So the question is not just fixing our plan here this morning. The question is, do we want to avoid the 74 pension plan ending up in PBGC, which is going to make things worse for the entire United States?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Warner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and the ranking member for your hard work in this area and the work that Senator Brown and Senator Casey and others have done. I think the testimony of you all has been extraordinarily powerful. I think sometimes we scratch our heads and we can't fully explain everything that's taken place in the political process right now. Well, Mrs. Lewis's testimony probably explains better than anything why certain things in the national political process seems to be going so off the rails, because people wonder where their government and those who are involved in trying to make sure promises are kept are actually going to keep those promises.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think a lot of us are kind of scratching our head as to a degree, I would say my colleagues on the other side, but both political parties seem to be going off the rails a little bit. And boy, I can't think of anything that would do more to restore some level of trust than to make sure that we honor these commitments.
And then not just that, but the commitments to our families. I
Yes,
mean,
ma'am.
most of us as grandparents, we contribute to either our children or our grandchildren's welfare in some way. And I've asked the retirees to ask their kids, if this comes into effect and we are cut the way we're cut, do your children have the financial resources to take care of us?
Well, that's
And they don't, and it's a domino effect. And there are going to be more people dying, just like my husband died. One man committed suicide over this. Another man, John DeWitt, in the early part of February, he had a massive stroke, just like my husband did. And now my husband was only 64 years old. We were planning on our retirement. I was going to retire in 2 years. Look at the rest of my life. The love of my life is gone. And then to have to live, and he fought a war in Vietnam, and now he had to fight this war. And I think that's totally unfair.
Well, we also see, and this is why I think so many of us are working on this, we've got a couple of other miners here from Virginia
Yes.
who are also have their lives and their families affected. I do think the Miners Protection Act, which is bipartisan, takes a step in solving this issue. I know there are other issues involved as well. I guess I would also just say, Dr. Briggs, you had some, I think, good comments prospectively, but the truth is we've got to honor the commitment of folks who have paid in and year out. And Mr. Roberts, one, thank you for always being articulate on this, but I guess I'd like to drill down a little bit. Senator Casey and Brown and I raised this along with Senator Wyden a while back, and I cited a couple of Virginians who had enormous health care issues, and got the word today that one of those Virginians got a really horrific medical diagnosis, even since a couple of weeks back. I think at times, and Cecil, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment, we kind of sometimes lump together health and pension benefits. And can you speak to the fact that this is two separate funds, they can't be commingled, and how critically important it is to maintain both of these sets of benefits?
Yeah, well, it's been spoken to here primarily by Mrs. Lewis about people relying on these promises year in, year out. I think it's important to note with respect to this is not something that we consider a handout here. I think she articulated that so well. Minors could have very easily had higher wages, more time off, more vacations, maybe had their own money to help fend off some of this, but they relied on this promise of health care. And the thing to remember about coal miners, they're sicker than the rest of us. As bad as you might think that some other occupations are, you ought to try working underground for 40 years in a very dangerous environment. Most miners suffer from pneumoconiosis. Most miners have had injuries over their lifetime. Their medical bills are higher than the average person across this United States of America of ours. So they relied so heavily on this promise of health care. If you read my testimony, it suggests to folks that they knew upon retirement that they were going to need health care. And they also knew it would be hard to purchase. So they relied on the promise year in, year out, year in, year out, over a 30 or 40-year career, that the one thing that was going to happen is if they got sick and had a $500,000 health care bill, that it would be paid.
I just want to close with maybe one last comment from you, Mr. Roberts, is that, you know, I believe strongly in making sure we deal with our balance sheet issues, but the notion that we would, in effect, be on a revenue stream taking $1 billion out of some of the most economically distressed communities, you know, the ripple effect that would have, and the reliance upon then other taxpayer-supported programs. You want to make one quick?
I think it's extremely important to speak to that. It's in my testimony, but if you go back and ask yourselves, well, why in the world did the government ever get involved in this process to start with? First of all, at that point in time, coal miners and their union were the most powerful organization in the United States of America. And if John L. Lewis had put coal miners on strike in those days, it would shut down the economy of the country. But they being the most patriotic people in the world coming back from World War II themselves, Lewis didn't want to do that. Harry Truman didn't want that to happen. The Congress didn't want that to happen. So the one thing that Lewis was asking for is a retirement plan and health care for these miners who never had it. So we took the money, our union took that money, invested it in the coal fields. And how did they invest it in the coal fields? They brought doctors into the coal fields that had never been there before. They built 10 hospitals in the coal fields that never been there before. They brought specialists in. They treated these miners who had lost their limbs and never been walking around on stumps and without arms and without legs, and sent them to places and had artificial arms and legs and put on them. This has been a godsend to the most hard-hit areas of this country. Now what we're suggesting on doing here, let's go back to the way it was in 1944 and 1945. I'm telling you that the domino effect here is going to be, and I think you know this very well, Senator, you spent a lot of time down in Southwest Virginia. You're going to have clinics and hospitals and doctors leave these areas, and people are going to have difficulty finding places to go. The one thing that's happened, the state of West Virginia, just to report here this morning, has lost more citizens than any other state in the union. Why is that? It's the collapse of the coal industry. Now we're talking about taking something, the retirees who want to stay in these coal fields, we're talking about taking their pensions away from them, talking about taking their health care away from them, and talking about taking away the places they go to get this treatment. I just, I'm sorry I get somewhat passionate about it, but I know you feel the same way that I do. You spend time down there talking to these people just like I do. This is a tragedy that's unfolding in this country, and there's something we can do about it here if we all act together.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you to Senator Wyden for holding this hearing and for your interest in working with us on solutions. I can't wait to talk to you, Rita, but let me just ask Cecil a quick question.
Okay.
One thing that hasn't been talked about, Cecil, is how the funding can be used from the Abandoned Mine Land Fund to help fund the Miners Pension Protection Act, which I'm a co-sponsor of, and thank you for your work with our coal miners throughout Eastern Ohio. As you say, they're getting hit from all sides. Let's face it. You can call it a war on coal, you can call it a battle on coal, I don't care what you call it. You know, we're losing coal miners every single day, and the retirees are getting hit now because of the pension. So $495 million is what I see currently in the Mine Land Fund, and they've been spending less than half of that. Can you talk a little about that?
I think it'd be good to lay just a little foundation here, because the premise of this legislation is to draw from what is already there. This is another role that the government has played in these plans over the years. In '92, legislation was passed and signed by Republican President George Bush that allowed for any miner that retired prior to October 1st, '94 to have their health care guaranteed by the United States government off the interest money of the Abandoned Mine Fund. This law was amended in 2006. It also established a permanent appropriation of $400 and some million. And that theory behind that was that the coal industry was paying this amount of money in taxes on leasing. So there's two funding sources that have been available here since '92 to fund the health care and now we're proposing not to add anything else to that legislation other than to just give us a right to have access to the amount of money that was appropriated on a permanent basis in 2006. So we're not here without a solution to this. And that's the only thing that this legislation is asking to be done. So there's two sources of funding here, but the interest money off of the Abandoned Mines Fund, plus you make a good point, Senator. There is additional money in the Abandoned Mines Fund itself. It has not been used, but we have access, as we gather here today, to the interest money off of that. Plus, we have a permanent appropriations established by the Congress of the United States in 2006 for healthcare purposes. If we extended that to pension purposes, we could fix this problem. That's pretty much what this bill does.
Well, that's a really important point to make, and I thank you for letting us know that there is a solution out there that's, I think, very reasonable. And Rita, thank you again for coming and your testimony, and you're here for everybody else, and I thank you for that. You've been terrific. I'm just thinking, Mr. Chairman, if there were hundreds of thousands of Social Security beneficiaries getting their retirement benefits cut by as much as 70%, there would be a national outrage.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And these Teamsters played by the rules, as was talked about today, did exactly what they were told to do and worked long hours and many years with the expectation that this would be there. And yet that's exactly what's happening to them. And I get the math, and we talked about it earlier. This is tough. Central states' liabilities exceed their assets by tens of billions of dollars, according to Mr. Gotbaum. They're on a course toward bankruptcy. I get that, but MIPR is just not fair. It wasn't fair in the way it was done, without transparency, without hearings, without this committee ever taking a look at it. It was slipped into a bill in the dark of the night. I voted against it. Others voted for it. I'm not here to point fingers on that at all, but I will say we now need to work together. We need to figure this out. It's not fair in terms of the result. And people say, well, you're just worried because it's Ohio. It's not just Ohio. I had my team do an analysis that you've seen that goes through every state and every congressional district in America to show what the impact is. And it affects everybody in this hearing room.
It does.
And I think the Pension Accountability Act that we put together helps because it fixes a broken process. It says that difficult decisions have to be made, but everybody deserves a seat at the table if that's the case. Again, it's about fairness. It's really about making it democratic. Workers and retirees are given a binding vote under our legislation on any pension cuts, not just a show vote, which is what it is now for any big plan. Treasury can overrule it. It also makes it sure that there's a fair vote by counting the ballots that are actually returned, rather than counting all unreturned ballots as a yes. To me, that's outrageous.
You're right.
And that's what occurs now. You don't return your ballot, it's an automatic yes. That makes no sense.
No.
A bunch of us wouldn't be elected here if that was the case in our democracy. And so the purpose is not to stop the process of fixing it, but to ensure that everyone is at the table. And I'm convinced we'd get a better result if that was true.
Absolutely, we would.
And that's why I think this legislation is an important step. It's only the first step. But to get a fair result for Rita and the hundreds of thousands of other people who are seeing these dramatic cuts to their pensions with no notice is just...
It's not a democratic process as far as we're concerned, and this is
No, it's
supposed
not.
to be a democracy. And before I forget, this is my first time testifying. I would like to make a special thank you to the IBT, ARP, and the Pensions Right organization. But my husband wrote a wonderful speech, and he started out with the three most important words in the Constitution, which are "we the people." And a lot of people have read it, a lot of people have seen it. And having his most three important words, what I'd like to add on to that, we're guaranteed certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These cuts come into fruition, we're not going to have a life. What kind of life will we have? Not what we thought the American dream was supposed to be, not what we thought when we were putting in all those hours where our husbands and spouses were working. Our life, our quality of life is going to be diminished. I'm going to be living a substandard life, which I don't think is fair just because my husband is gone. The liberty, we're not going to have the right to go and do what we want because our financial resources are going to be stripped from us. And the pursuit of happiness, all of those ideas of happiness and the dreams that we believed in this country and why so many people came to this country and our forefathers signed into the Constitution, those are no longer going to exist. And I just don't know how in good conscience, how people can go to bed at night and not see what's going to happen, the domino effect, the catastrophic effect that's going to happen in this country. There are going to be people dying just not from the stress of this, but they're not going to be able to buy their medication, which is going to lead to stress, which is going to lead to death. There's going to be more people applying for public assistance. That's going to put a burden on the government. There has to be a bipartisan solution to this problem, and I know that you can all work together and come together and do it. I believe that. We have to. We have to save this generation. We're the last generation that's ever going to have money. Our kids aren't going to have it. They're struggling now. So it's up to us to set the precedent and say, we're going to be here. We're going to keep fighting till we get a solution that's fair to all of us who've given everything, especially I'm a third of, like I said, there was a gentleman who committed suicide when this first came out. Mr. John DeWitt had a massive stroke just like my husband did. And now my husband. There's going to be more and more people dying, and that's going to be blood on the hands of someone who won't step forward and help us. We worked hard. We built these economies. We contribute so much to economies when 87% of the economy is driven by the middle class. And what's going to happen when we're gone? Has anyone thought that far ahead to see what's going to happen? The bottom line isn't always the dollar. There's a human aspect element to this as well. And I thought that that's what this country was founded on. And that's all I'd like to say.
We appreciate it.
Rita, thank you.
You're next.
Thank you. And let me just, if I could, Mr. Chairman, just say, you're speaking not just for yourself, but as Butch did in his life, you're speaking for hundreds of thousands of others. And I've met with hundreds of those pensioners, of the Teamsters in Ohio, and you have given a voice to them today. And you are now the face of this battle. So
Please
let's
don't
continue.
forget us. Please, I'm
Well, we
begging
won't.
you. Please, don't forsake us.
And remember, on the House side, there's a companion bill that was also introduced after our bill over here, and it's bipartisan. And this doesn't mean that we don't continue to look for other sources of funding, including ways to replenish these funds that could be raised inside the multi-employer pension system. We're working, you mentioned the Pension Rights Center, working with them and others.
Yes.
So
A great help.
I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Okay, thank you
Thanks,
so
Rita.
much.
God
Thank
bless
you,
you.
all of you.
Okay, Senator Heller.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to you, to the ranking member, also for your concern on this particular issue and holding this important hearing. I want to thank those that are on the panel today for your expertise to help us better understand. Mrs. Lewis, thank you for being here, for being a public face and a public voice on this issue. It makes a big difference, and you have made a difference today. I am the chairman of the Social Security Pensions and Family Policy Subcommittee. I share with Hatch and Senator Wyden's concerns and their commitments to ensure that all seniors receive safe and stable retirements that they have earned and that they deserve. So more than 14% of my home state's population is over the age of 65. I'm from Nevada, by the way. And I hear on a daily basis the importance of retirement programs like Social Security and pensions. I appreciate members on our committee and other senators that are working to try to fix this problem. Senator Portman talked about his Pension Accountability Act. Obviously, Senator Manchin was here earlier with the Minors Protection Act. I don't know if my statistics are equal to what Senator Portman had, but there are hundreds of participants in my state that receive their pension through Central States. And worst case scenario, that's over $56 million. That'd be a total loss of retirement income to my constituents. So your concerns are my concerns, and I share those with you. For decades, it's become too common for Congress to use the Social Security Trust Fund as a piggy bank for government programs. All the while, businesses have mismanaged their pension funds. So now as the baby boomer generation retires, seniors are facing significant consequences of not receiving the retirement security that they had planned on. So we need to start making a good look at these promises that we made to these retirees, and I think this hearing was a great start. So thank you very much for your help and support throughout this hearing. I do have a question for Dr. Biggs. Appreciate you being here. How familiar are you with the Nevada Public Employees Retirement System?
I have done some work on the Nevada plan several years ago.
The reason I ask is that you had a published report in 2014, and you found that Nevada's public pensions are one of the richest in the nation, $64,000 a year, or more than $1.3 million in lifetime benefits. And I guess the question that I have, and I share with you and others that have contacted my office, is how sustainable is this as you compare to others?
Well, state and local pensions like Nevada's share some characteristics with multi-employer plans in terms of the accounting standards that they work from. Both of them are allowed to what's called discount their liabilities using the expected return on a risky portfolio of assets, meaning mostly stocks. So they'll value their liabilities using the expectation of getting between a 7 and 8% return. Literally 98% of economists think that's wrong, that it dramatically understates the liabilities of these plans. If you were to look at the multi-employer plans, I think probably a third of participants now are in these dangerously underfunded plans. If you used accurate accounting, it would be more than half of the
Can I stop you right there? Just because of the statistics that I know, the public pension has over $10 billion in unfunded liabilities, the Nevada pension plan. And it basically it's been somewhere between 6 to 10 billion for the last 25 years.
They are underfunded even using very, very forgiving accounting standards. And so the amount of financial risk they're facing is significant, and the state and local plans pose the same issue as the multi-employer plans. They're too big to fail. If they go under, legally speaking, it's the retirees who are going to get hit, or the state governments will take the hit. The reality is, they talk about the Federal Reserve is called the lender of last resort. In reality, it's the federal taxpayer is going to be the lender of last resort, except they won't get repaid. So my point in this is we really, really need to find a way to get on top of these issues. Where we are, we have a lot of innocent people who did what they were asked to do. And I'm from an area of rural Oregon that was devastated economically by the loss of the logging industry. So I agree with Mr. Roberts on what will happen to West Virginia if these plans go under. But my point is we can't continue making the same mistakes over and over again.
Are you in a position, Dr. Biggs, to determine whether or not Nevada's pension system is healthy or not? How would you grade it?
If Nevada's public pension system were set if it had to use the same accounting standards as a private sector plan did, which it should, and if it were graded using the same categories that are applied to private sector plans, from green to red,
Sure.
it would probably be in the red zone, meaning not very well funded at all.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator. Senator Castlebaum.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you. And obviously, Mrs. Lewis, thank you very much for being here, and
Thank you.
and President Roberts for speaking for all of your members as well. This is an issue when Secretary Lew, Secretary of the Treasury, came before us not long ago that I raised to him as well, because it's absolutely unacceptable what's happening to pensions in our country. And whether it's United Mine Workers, whether it's Central States, it's just not acceptable, period. And it needs to be fixed. And we all say a promise is a promise, but a promise is a promise.
Mm-hmm.
And so it needs to be kept. Everything you said in terms of what's happening to people is devastating and unacceptable. We've got to have a permanent fix to this. But I also want to add another dimension to this, that as I've looked into it on behalf of retirees in Michigan and have heard more and more of their concerns, that I find really adds insult to injury, and would welcome your thoughts on this as well. Because while retirees and those who are going to be retirees are going to be suffering as a result of these pension cuts, some people aren't suffering as a result of this.
Right.
The people who made the decisions.
That's true.
And so in 2014, the Central States Pension Fund CEO was paid $694,786. There have been people getting bonuses while things have been cut. Other executives getting hefty salary increases. In 2014 alone, before the Multiemployer Pension Reform Act passed, the Central States Pension Fund also spent $568,000 in pension plan assets to lobby Congress to pass that bill. I had no idea when folks were coming before us that that's what was happening. So while I strongly support the broader solutions that you are talking about, I also intend to introduce legislation based on what I've heard from constituents in Michigan to address what I view as abuses of the pension funds in the form of high executive salaries and raises and bonuses of the same people that are making these decisions. If pensions were going to be cut, then those people's salaries and benefits should be cut as well. And I also think that we should not see pension funds being used to lobby. So I know there's a great deal of frustration, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, about this particular issue, adding what I view as insult to injury here. And it needs to be addressed. Mrs. Lewis, would you want to speak to how you feel about that?
Yes, because what Thomas Nyhan got in his raise, that's twice what I'm going to be getting as a widow, survivor benefits. And the thing was, is there was never any transparency. There was never any input from us. It's like we handed over our money, but we didn't get any feedback. And if you would try to contact them, there was no response. Even when we would get the letter saying that was in critical status, there was never any kind of communication with having us meet with them, to talk to them. We had no decision about financial advisors. It's like we were handing their money over to them and they could do whatever they wanted with it. And even when you meet with a financial planner, you sit there one-on-one for him and you discuss your portfolio. We never had that option.
Well, and that's absolutely unacceptable in my mind.
It is.
Mr. Chairman, one other issue I do want to raise, whether it's multi-employer pension plans or single-employer pension plans, over the years, what we have seen to jeopardize and undermine pensions is also not acceptable. I remember reading the book, The Retirement Heist. Author and investigative journalist Ellen Schultz highlighted a number of changes over the years, whether it's accounting changes or law changes that have allowed employers to begin treating their pensions differently. And I'm very concerned more broadly that we are seeing employers cut or freeze pension plans even when they're doing well. So selling pension assets in mergers, using the assets to finance downsizing, working aggressively to, quote, de-risk their pensions by shifting the responsibility for paying pension benefits to private insurance companies or switching to defined contributions. So Mr. Chairman, as we go forward, we have immediate things to answer, but then if we want to reverse this for the future, I think there's a broader discussion that needs to happen here about the undermining of the middle class in this country by undermining the pension system.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Scott, you're next, and then Senator Brown. I'm sorry, I passed over you, and I apologize for that. I'm going to have to leave, but I want you to know that I'm going to do everything in my power to try and help here.
Thank you.
We appreciate all the testimony we've had today on this issue, and let's see what we can do.
Okay.
Senator
Thank you.
Scott, and then
Thank you.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the panel for being here today, and Mrs. Lewis, we certainly, our hearts go out to where you are and what you're facing, and certainly to so many people who are here today are faced with a similar situation. The numbers are going down when the promises are going up. There's a couple of realities here that we seem to be missing. One of the realities is too many union leaders, too many employers in Central States specifically have overpromised, and they will continue to under-deliver. And there's clear evidence to this fact. Part of the challenge that we see with our situation with these pensions is simply that just a few years ago, the payout on pensions was about $2.8 billion. The revenues coming in from people paying into their plan was around $750 million. I'm not sure which actuary you can talk to figure out how you get the type of returns necessary to support the system. It is basically impossible for us to get there. And then you put on top of that the administration's regulatory burden on specific industries where the employees are highly unionized, like the coal miners. Here's a classic example where the regulatory burden is running folks out of the business. So in other words, fewer employees to support the pensions that have been promised. This is frustrating, it's irritating, and it is illogical. We need a panoramic view of the situation, the crisis that exists for so many employees. I know that in South Carolina alone, some 3,000 to 4,000 employees have created a lifestyle based on the promises made to them that they expect will be promises kept. And unfortunately, what we're hearing today from you and so many others who've called into my office is too consistently the promises made are the promises broken. And the reality of it is, if we think about that number of $2.8 billion in benefits being paid out and only $750 million in the same year coming in, it is unrealistic for us to have a conversation about keeping the system solvent when in fact we know, based on basic math, we are looking down a very steep road. And I would hope that at some point we become realistic. So if these pensions go insolvent, we can guarantee that next to P, B, and G, and C will also find itself in the same situation. So we should be looking for a new sales pitch to attract employees into the industry so that they're paying into the plan, because ultimately, if in fact we're going to continue to sell a defined benefit as a reality based on those numbers that I just quoted, we know that we'll be having this conversation with more widows in more days in the future, and that is unfair and perhaps even immoral.
Correct.
Dr. Biggs, quick question for you. If multi-employer pension plans had used the same interest rates and life expectancy assumptions as single employer plans and contributions were calculated accordingly, how many of the multi-employer plans would be deemed critical today? Or maybe a simpler question, would we be in a better position?
My guess is, I think about 25% or so of plans are critically underfunded now, about a third or so of participants, maybe a bit more than that. If multi-employer pensions were required to use the same accounting standards as single-employer plans, which are a more rational standard, I think the majority of plans and participants would be in that kind of dangerously underfunded zone. So as bad as things look for multi-employer plans on paper, it is an unrealistically optimistic view because they get to use accounting standards that other pension plans don't use.
So it just ain't gonna work.
It ain't gonna work.
Okay, I want to make this sure we keep this simple. Now, the composite plans that we've heard so much about, basically a hybrid between defined benefit and defined contribution, some are skeptical about how that works out. Having spent 25 years of my professional life in the insurance business and a smidgen in the retirement benefit business as well, it seems to me that if you're looking for a composite plan to be the panacea, you're probably on the wrong track.
Well, if you were to structure a plan, I mean, say, for instance, Senator Hatch has his proposal for the safe annuity plan, where state and local governments could purchase deferred annuities to provide a guaranteed benefit for retirees, that's something that can provide that kind of security. The composite plans are proposed as sort of the best of both worlds. They'll have stable contributions for employers, and they'll have stable-ish benefits for retirees. The problem is, between the employer's contribution and the retiree's benefits is a whole lot of stocks, and stocks are not stable. I have nothing against investing in stocks, but it comes, the risk and return go together. I think there is an illusion with the composite plans. You can get the return without the risk. That is the same illusion that hurt multi-employer plans with their accounting. It's the exact same illusion that hurt state and local plans. We need to get over that illusion.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Ranking Member Wyden. A couple of hours ago, again, thank you to the panel for being here. A couple hours ago, I met in my office. Cecil Roberts was there, but joined by two mine workers, Norman Skinner of Dresden, Ohio, and Coshocton County, and David Dilley from Coshocton County, and Norm Skinner from Dresden. Also, Whitlow Wyatt and Barbara, his husband and wife, were there, and their beautiful 11-year-old granddaughter, Isabella, and she said I could call her Bella, so I'm cool. But I bring that up because of the comments that they made, echoing really what Mrs. Lewis said in her testimony when at one point she said that my husband and the union gave up wages and vacation pay to earn these pensions and long-term health care. I remember sitting in a committee room that looked like this. It was the banking committee during the auto rescue, and I remember hearing people across the horseshoe from me critical of these auto workers who had all these legacy costs. Well, these legacy costs are what it just makes me think that a lot of people here don't understand the union movement, that legacy costs are about workers saying, okay, I'll take less today in wages. I'll give up maybe a week's vacation or a couple sick days in order to get pensions and health care, as if that's not good for our society. And Mr. Gotbaum's father was a leader in understanding that and how important that is. So I just want to put that on the table. At least the three of you, if not all four of you on this panel, understand that. And I just think it's important to lay it out. Let me kind of synopsize something. The crises of both UMWA and central state pension plans are happening on different timetables. They have different remedies. I want to lay that out so everybody understands that watching this and on the committee. For central states, the most immediate remedies with the Treasury Department, as we know, which has the power to reject these cuts for justifiable reasons. For the mine workers, responsibility falls with us in this committee first. I'm so pleased that Senator Hatch is supporting the effort and that Senator Wyden has spoken out repeatedly, as has Senator Casey and Senator Warner and others, and Senator Manchin, saying that this committee should do nothing until it fixes this. This should be the first priority in this committee, to fix the mine workers' pension. We can do it. We know how to do it. It doesn't cost taxpayers a lot. It will not end up with undercutting PBGC, which would be a travesty no matter what state you're from. So putting that out there and how important. Now, I also know from what Ms. Lewis said, if Wall Street executives were about to lose their Christmas bonuses, they'd be marching on Washington. And, why aren't we? So my question, I have one question for each, one for Mr. Roberts, for President Roberts, and then one for Mrs. Lewis. A number of us have been focused on this issue because of the impact it has on thousands of workers. Walk through what will happen, Mr. President, to PBGC if issues confronting, if this Congress fails, if the leadership in this Congress fails to act, what happens to PBGC?
It's been suggested we use some math here, so let me use some math. I never was too good at that, but let me give it a try. This came up a little bit earlier, but we have access to a letter that was written to Congressman McKinley. I don't know if that's been provided to the committee or not, where PBGC answered a question from Congressman McKinley about this issue. And PBGC said to a representative of the United States Congress, Congressman McKinley, that this would collapse PBGC in 2 to 3 years if indeed our fund went insolvent. So the question really in some ways here is whether or not the United States Congress wants PBGC to go insolvent along with our pension plan. I think the answer to that in a bipartisan way is no. Mainly because it costs more money, using simple math here, to fix this problem unless we just decide as a government that we'll just completely get out of the pension business. And that's not going to happen, in my opinion. People across the United States will not allow that to happen. There is, as Mrs. Lewis pointed out, a weed of people out there that sometimes gets upset about certain things. And when you start talking about no one having a pension, I think folks in this country are going to get very upset.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. First of all, your testimony was one of the highlights I've seen in this committee in a number of years. Thank you for the passion and the information and the detail and the understanding of this pretty complicated issue, but you put a face on it that was so important. If after cutting 270,000 pensions, Central States managers claim if all the proposed cuts are enacted, the pension will have, they say, a 50.4 chance of remaining solvent. So we do these cuts and still 50.4% chance. Put another way, if after cutting the pension that your husband and 250,000 other working people earned over a lifetime of sweat and toil, there's still about a 50% chance a pension will fail. My question is, do you think these cuts are worth it for what amounts to a coin flip?
No. I can only speak for myself, but I don't think we should have the cuts. We weren't, and like I said, I can't speak for the retirees, but all I know is we did our part and we did everything right. They gave up wages and vacations. No, because I don't think that it's really going to do any good. Because to be honest with you, even when the economy was doing well, from 2008 to 2015 or 14, we had a 300% increase in the stock market, but we were still losing money. We just lost billions of dollars in the last quarter. If you're doing that poorly and you're managing a fund, and I'm sure Senator Brown, if you're a manager of your retirement was doing that poorly, you'd be calling him in and you'd say, hey, what's going on here? Why are we consistently losing all this money? And you would fire him as a fund manager. Well, we have the same person who's been running our fund for years, and he keeps losing money. And we don't have a voice. We don't have anyone there's no transparency. There's nothing. It's like we're just just throwing it out the window. But as far as I'm concerned, no. I don't think it'll make a difference.
Senator Brown, we're going to have to go to Senator Thin. Senator Thin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and Chairman Hatch for having this important hearing. This is a very timely opportunity for us to discuss multi-employer pension plans, which are a very important element of financial planning and stability for millions of Americans. And I especially want to thank the witnesses for providing their expertise and insights on the state of multi-employer plans at large, as well as the very real-world negative impacts that the condition of these plans could have on American retirees and their families. And particularly want to recognize and acknowledge Mrs. Lewis, you being here, and thank you for putting a personal face on these issues and for articulating in a very real way these impacts, and our deepest condolences to you for your loss and for what you've been through this last year, all the trials and hardships. But I just want to, pensions are such an important central part of our retirement planning. You have workers who have foregone other savings or investments, trusting that their pension would be there at the end of their career. And unfortunately, certain of these multi-employer plans and even the PBGC itself are at risk for insolvency. And so before us are several reform proposals, as well as the pressing and sensitive topic of the Central States Pension Fund and what to do about that. The Central States plan has been left severely underfunded by the recessions and so-called orphan retirees whose companies are no longer contributing to the plan. It's now in the difficult position of either reducing participant benefits or likely becoming insolvent or unable to pay any benefits starting in as soon as a decade. Insolvency in my state of South Dakota would not only harm the more than 1,300 South Dakota participants that are in this plan, but it obviously would pose a significant risk to the PBGC, which we've mentioned earlier. So given the gravity of the topic and the impact that these benefit reductions would have on retirees, I want to thank the witnesses for your time today, and I also want to express my interest and support for working together to find equitable solutions to the very real hardships that are facing these participants in South Dakota and across the country. And in that light, I would like to direct this question to Dr. Biggs or to Mr. Gotbaum, and it kind of comes back to the Treasury plan, which in consultation with the Department of Labor, they have, I think, until May 7th to review the rescue plan that's been submitted by Central States. And the question is, considering the current outlook for the fund, could you speak to what could happen to participant benefits if the administration were to deny its application, or if participants and beneficiaries were to reject it?
Why don't I speak to that? The Treasury, under the law, the Treasury, in consultation with the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation and the Department of Labor, has to satisfy itself that the conditions of the law are being met. And there are a bunch of them. One is, it has to be true that the cuts are absolutely necessary to avoid the plan running out of money. Another one is that the cuts can't be more than is necessary to avoid the plan running out of money. And so they are now, and I'm not an insider on this, I just know the law, know some of the folks, et cetera. So what they are doing now is checking the facts, checking the situation, et cetera. They then have to form a judgment whether or not the conditions for this admittedly miserable law are met. If they decide that they are met, they will say so. At that point, there will be the vote. And as Senator Wyden pointed out, the vote is, and Senator Portman too, there is a vote, and if a majority of the people who are in the plan in total vote against it, then they go back to Treasury, and Treasury has to decide whether or not they are willing to override the vote. And the judgment that they make then is whether or not the plan is so big that its failure would bankrupt the PBGC and bankrupt the system. That's the process they're following. And part of the reason why, even though, there's nobody on this side of the table who likes the law or likes the process. Part of the reason why I think the law is necessary is because I don't see another way that's going to happen to keep the plan from running out of money entirely. That's really...
Would there be time to rework and resubmit a new plan, rescue plan? If any of that happened, it was either turned down or the Treasury?
I'm not the right person. I don't have enough inside information to answer that. What I know that they have said is that the work involved in developing a plan, reviewing a plan, getting it reviewed by Treasury and voting again would probably take another year. And each year that they, as Senator Scott pointed out, each year that they put out a lot more money than they take in, the room they have to keep the plan from going to PBGC goes away. So I can't tell you that they can.
Senator Casey.
Thank you very much. I first want to say that we appreciate the testimony of the witnesses and your presence here, Mrs. Lewis, especially to you. Whenever a witness can bring a personal story, that makes a substantial impression on everyone here, and I want you to know how much we appreciate you bringing your own family story to this hearing. In the interest of time, I'll direct my question to the United Mine Workers and President Roberts. I was thinking today not just of the numbers here, 90,000 Americans, about just a little bit less than 13,000 in Pennsylvania, but also thinking about some of our history. Cecil Roberts knows this history well. There was a great novelist by the name of Stephen Crane. Everyone knows him for the Red Badge of Courage, but he wrote a wonderful essay in the 1890s about a coal mine near Scranton, my hometown, and described it in haunting detail about all the ways that a miner could be hurt or killed in that mine. He talked about it being a place of inscrutable darkness, a soundless place of tangible loneliness. And he goes on to describe how difficult it was then. Now, I realize that the coal mines of even the 1950s and certainly the coal mines of today may not have those same dangers, but there are plenty of dangers and plenty of aches and pains that come from years of work. And I just was able to meet two of our Pennsylvanians here today, Attorney Bernczak and Dave Van Sickle, both from Fayette County. And we're grateful that you're here with us. Fayette County has about more than 2,000 of that 13,000. But Tony and Dave have about 80 years between them in the mines, and we're grateful that they're here as witnesses. We have much to do, but not a lot of time, and we're at a crossroads. And Mr. Roberts, as you know, I should say President Roberts, as you know, we have a bill that started with Senator Manchin, Senator Capito, but also working with the ranking member, Senator Wyden, and Senator Warner and Senator Brown and I. So we got a good team on this, but we've got to act. And one of the best ways to convey why we have to act is what this means to these miners and to their families. The benefits are rather modest. They average about $530 a month. And I guess, President Roberts, my one and only question in the interest of time is, could you just tell us what this means to those miners and their families? How it will affect them if we don't act?
Well, the most immediate effect on these miners will be at the end of this year for the 21,000 plus who will lose their health care completely and would have to rely solely on Medicare if they're eligible for Medicare. Remember, they would have to take money out of that $500 and some we're talking about here to pay for Medicare on top of everything else. And we're going to have a reduction immediately to those 21,000 plus people for Medicare. In addition to that, Medicare doesn't pay for everything. We know that. So that pension you're talking about for many of these miners will be gone completely to pay for health care that they were promised during their working lives as a miner. In addition to that, there are 90,000 people that we've talked about, one of which I never mentioned happens to be my 96-year-old mother, who is a widow and still receives a widow's pension from the United Mine Workers Fund. I know literally thousands of these people across this country who are depending on these pensions every month. They go to the mailbox or they go to the post office, and that helps them survive. So the effects on losing these pensions would be dramatic. The one thing I think I should say here is some have implied that these promises were too much, too great. That's not the case here, and absolutely not. In 2007, the coal industry and the union negotiated a contract, and at that time, 93% of the benefits in the 74 plan were funded, and the actuary said that we were well on the way to being 100% funded and something occurred that we couldn't control and no one in Congress can control, and that was the recession. And the people who made those decisions had nothing to do with coal miners, had nothing to do with the 74 pension plan, had nothing to do with any of the people we're talking about here today, but they had to pay the price. And I don't want to get too far out here, but we did bail those folks out, and the folks who had nothing to do with this are paying the consequences for this.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this hearing. And I, too, want to commend Mrs. Lewis for being here, and thank you for putting a human face to this story. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what exactly this loss has meant to you, seeing a 40% cut. And obviously people are talking about something even bigger, but what has that meant to you? And the reason why I bring that up is people want to know why there's frustration in America now. I can tell you why, because when the recession hit and people basically, you know, we bailed out the big banks and they got money and everybody's 401 and pension took it on the chin. Right, exactly. And basically what did we get? Did anybody bail them out? So now people are left with a long-term retirement instability. And yet we gave billions to those guys and now they're making billions. And so people want to know, what are we going to do to make sure that Americans who lost their retirement security are secured for the future? So if you could talk about what exactly seeing a 40% income loss has meant to you on a daily basis.
It's pretty drastic. I'm going to have to sell my house. I've done the numbers. I've crunched the numbers. I'm taking out, I've left his insurance policy from when he died, and I'm buying a condo. I will be living a less standard lifestyle than I did when he was alive. That's not the American dream. I'm going to have to work for the rest of my life, where I had planned to retire with my husband, to spend that time with him in 2 more years when I'm 65. I only make $17 an hour, and I work for a police department. There's no overtime. There's nothing that there's involved. I am going to have to be self-sufficient for the rest of my life. And the life that we had planned for, that was guaranteed us through our pension, it's like that's a dream. And someone snatched it away from us. And that's not the way the American dream is. We were taught to believe you work for something, and someone promises you something. That promise is supposed to be there, and it's always supposed to be there for you. So the home that we had for 40 years, I now have to go through that. And all the memories that were there, you know, we had it before we had our 2 children, brought them into the house. I had my dad's baptism there. All those memories, I have to forgo now because of this, and now I have to move into a 3-room condo, and that's where I'm going to have to live for the rest of my life. And it's bad enough I lost my husband through all of this stress, and now I'm taking another loss financially and emotionally. It's tragic. It never should have happened. And if these cuts become fruition, there's going to be hundreds and thousands of people that are going to be dying. And I cannot believe that this government cannot find a solution. And that's what we're looking to all of you for, to help us. We trusted the people who were supposed to handle our money. They did not handle that money in our benefit. There has to be some accountability there. And that's why we are asking for a forensic audit. And shake it out, and whomever's guilty, if the funds were mishandled, those people should be prosecuted. There has to become a time where it's going to be us to stand and say, this is enough, because we're the guinea pig. And if we don't get a system then in place to say that we're going to be protected, it's going to be a domino effect, and it's going to be other pensions that are going to be in trouble. And the economy that you count on the middle class to drive, to keep this country going, it's going to be non-existent. And then what's going to happen to this country? This won't be America anymore. You'll have so many people living in poverty. But the bottom line is we trusted these people. We did everything right. And then at the last minute, you know, this is thrown in our face. My husband couldn't have gone back to work. There's a lot of these retirees that can't go back to work. And let's face it, my husband was president of his local. There's no way he's going to get a job anywhere else where he's going to make that kind of money. and they want you to go be a greeter at Walmart or Myers for $5 an hour to supplement. That's not what we worked for. That's not what we were promised. And that's what we're here for. And we're looking to you experts to find a solution for us. And if our country has enough money to give to everyone else who looks for a humanitarian help, because there's a humanitarian crisis. For God's sake, they have to look and see that we're the ones that are in crisis right now. And if you have enough money to give to foreign countries, you gotta have enough money to protect us and the mine workers and everybody else.
Well, I thank you. My time, or our time, has expired, but no one could have articulated that better, and I thank you for that. I would just add, though, the program for Teamsters was on its way to solvency in 2007, and I would say that the banking crisis took a big chunk out of this, and yet we bailed them out. I see everybody nodding. We bailed them out.
Right.
So, you know, juxtaposed to how much money we spend on foreign aid, I guarantee you that the Dallas Fed has estimated that this cost us trillions of dollars in loss to our economy, and now we're somehow supposed to put together here out of this panel the justification for why, you know, we should do something to help this pension. I don't need a justification. You just made the justification why we owe it to retirees to correct this and not just leave Wall Street with all the cash. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Cardin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this hearing, Senator Hatch. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. You're all very distinguished individuals and great leaders. But Mrs. Lewis, I particularly want to thank you because you know, we hear numbers all the time, and it's maybe we're getting immune to it. But when you recognize that every one of those numbers is a person with a family that affects their lives, so I particularly want to thank you for having the courage to be here today to tell of your story, so that we understand how this affects ordinary families in our community and the dignity of ordinary families in our community. And obviously, we need to do something about this. Senator Portman and I have been working on pension retirement issues for a long time because we recognize that we're in a changing economy, and that when we developed a pension security system, when we had a lot more people in the workforce relative to those that are retired, the pressures on Social Security are not what they are today. And when we were in a defined benefit world that was based upon actuary tables that were relevant to its time, that was a different world than today, when there's very few defined benefit plans being created and most people are on defined contribution plans, and you have mobility in the employment areas that are not relevant to today, to the pension plans we designed when ERISA was created. In the multi-employer plans, we need to reform that. I think we all agree. But, Mr. Chairman, we've got to deal with the problems that exist today before we look at how we're going to deal with multi-employer plans moving forward. We know that the PBGC does not have the resources to deal with the liabilities that are out there. And it's our responsibility to figure out how we can realistically deal with the risk factors that are there. With the minors, it deals not only with their retirement income, but also their health benefits. And we have to figure out a way. It's pretty urgent. As I understand it, that the health benefits are scheduled to be radically changed by the end of this year. So the time is moving forward, and we need to act on this. And as a nation, and I recognize years ago with Senator Portman, when we were both in the House, that we don't do enough for retirement security in America. And we're looking today at today's economy, whether you're a retired miner or whether you are just entering the workforce and now are an Uber driver. It's a different world than it was when we designed the plans decades ago. And it's our responsibility to help configure a plan that will take care of the Mrs. Lewises of the world and provide for younger people today the retirement security when they retire. And we are wealthy enough of a nation to be able to figure out how to do both. And it's that type of balance that I hope the Finance Committee will be able to come forward with. And Again, I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. I've listened to the testimony. I don't have any additional questions, but I just really wanted to thank you all for your testimony.
I thank my colleague, and I understand that the Ohio senators do not have any additional questions at this time, but I think it is just representative of what kind of morning this has been, that we've had 13 senators here, a number of senators had hectic schedules and just kept coming back, as the two Ohio senators did, and I think it is because of the extraordinarily powerful statements that we have heard this morning from our witnesses. And I'll just end, Mrs. Lewis, by paraphrasing you. I mean, to me, in our country, you just do not snatch away pension rights from Americans who never did anything but the right thing. Yes. And I just so appreciate what the four of you have contributed this morning. This is going to be urgent business here in the Senate Finance Committee, and you heard that from both sides of the aisle this morning. We thank you for a morning that really is pretty much unique in this room. And I thank all four of you, and with that, the Finance Committee is adjourned.
Very good.